Good afternoon. I'm Malu Cristobal, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on Tsinoys in Philippine life, rare treasures and precious vignettes. I guess the question that comes to mind is why talk about arts and culture at this time of the pandemic and of great distress and suffering? And our answer is our well being is central to our ability to get through this crisis. Arts and culture contribute in a meaningful way to our sense of equanimity and our well being. But more of that later. Now, this webinar is brought to you by the Arts and Culture Committee of the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines through the dynamic leadership of its liaison director, Domingo Go, and its chair, Attorney Alicia San Juan. So let me thank Doming and Leah for making this event possible. Now, to start our program, I'd like to call on an active member of the Arts and Culture Committee, Sonny Aguilar, to deliver the invocation and to lead us in the singing of the national anthem. Sonny?
Let us bow our heads and place ourselves in the presence of God. With joy of spirit, Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us today in fellowship for a purpose. We were brought into these uncertain times where your love and mercy are needed most. Help our organization discern and carry out your mandate for us evermore with action and passion. Lead our people to the path of healing the body, mind, and spirit as foundations for a meaningful life. Gift us with your illuminating truth to see and understand your ways, and in difficult times when we know we are not in control, to yield to your control. We have to move as one nation, and it has never been so apropos for you to lead us to our speakers today, who, with your guiding light, will share their knowledge and insights into our past, our depth and richness of our culture and heritage you had gifted us with. Enlighten us to appreciate these gifts, who we are, what we are, being one in diversity, living the present with thanksgiving, and forging forward with the richness of this knowledge. We ask for your divine healing for our members and for those suffering emotionally and physically. Comfort those who have lost loved ones and embrace the souls who you have called upon this earth. And in our silence, grief, and fear, help us to feel your love and mercy and assurance that things will get better for those who follow your ways. Protect our health workers and frontliners and those who have been selflessly serving. Strengthen their spirit, guide their hearts and hands, and continue to inspire them as they leave their homes, sustain their families and those they cannot care for. Help us care for our environment and to realize that Mother Nature is there for us to nurture so we can be nurtured in return. Lastly, grant our leaders the wisdom and the resoluteness to lead with courage and compassion and humility, to hear the cries of those who have lost their livelihood and those seeking justice. Please heal our country, Lord. And with your greatness, Lord, we lift your name on high as our souls sing in unison, lovingly praising you through the angelic voice of Miss Ana Migalios.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark.
Thank you, Sonny, and thank you, Anna, for that very heart-stirring start of our program. I cannot imagine a much more uplifting way to start the afternoon. We will now proceed with our program, and I'd like to call on Attorney Alicia San Juan. She is the chairman of the Arts and Culture Committee and also a partner of Picasso Law to formally welcome us to this afternoon's webinar. Leah?
Dear fellow Phoenix members and guests, good afternoon to everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the first webinar of the Arts and Culture Committee this year, Tsinoys in Philippine Life, Rare Treasures and Precious Vignettes. I would like to thank our speakers, Mrs. Teresita Angsi and Ms. Carmelea Angsi, for graciously accepting our invitation to share their knowledge and insights with us today. Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran, or Kaisa, the organization to which our speakers are connected, has, through the years, undertaken development projects such as low-cost housing, livelihood projects, calamity relief, book donation projects, educational support, and free medicines for PGH, which they have sustained since 1988 up to the present. In 2020, Kaisa experienced its busiest and most challenging year, with its personnel working 12 to 16 hours a day, sourcing, purchasing, deploying, and delivering PPEs to as far as Jolo, Basilan, and Tawi-Tawi in the south, and to Apari, Cagayan, and Batanes in the north, thus enabling around 600 hospitals throughout the country to receive PPEs during the most critical time of their need at the height of the pandemic. This has caused our speakers a lot of backlog in their work, but despite their hectic schedules, they have graciously agreed to share their time with us today. With the recent start of the Lunar New Year, it seems appropriate that we start the activities of the Arts and Culture Committee with a talk on the role of the Filipino-Chinese in the art, history, and culture of the Philippines. During today's talk, our speakers will share interesting stories and anecdotes about the Chinese in the Philippines and show us some rare treasures and artifacts housed in the Bahay Chinoy Museum. I am sure that we will learn a lot from our guest speakers. With this knowledge, we hope to have a better appreciation and understanding of our shared history and heritage. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. We're now moving to the highlight of our program. And I'd like to call on our liaison director, who is also the independent director of Alliance Select Foods International, Mr. Domingo Go, to do the honors of introducing our two guest speakers. Doming.
Colleagues in Phoenix, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Ateneo de Manila University's history professor and popular Filipino historian Ambeth Ocampo wrote in his column at the Philippine Daily Inquirer last March 5th that culture is essential as it is taken on broader terms as the arts, behavior, customs, institutions, language, and everything else that defines us. Culture makes Filipinos distinct from others. Culture differentiates us from other peoples and nations. In this context, therefore, it is my privilege to introduce our speakers for this afternoon, who will share their insights about Tsinoys, their role and impact not only in aspects of Philippine life, but also in events that shaped the Philippines as a nation. In the interest of time, please allow me to introduce both of them. First, an introduction of our second speaker, to be followed by my introduction of the first speaker. Our second speaker for today has spent 50 years in NGO work and is a well-known social activist, cultural worker, and author. A recipient of the Outstanding Women in Nation Service or Towns Award in 1992 for her work in cultural integration, she has made outstanding contributions to peace and social cohesion for 50 years. She is the founding president of Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran, often referred to by its acronym Kaisa, a movement made up of Chinese Filipinos that advocates the proactive and sustainable participation of the Tsinoy community in local and national development. She currently serves as the executive trustee of the Kaisa Heritage Center, which functions as the repository of the historical and cultural legacy of the Tsinoys in all aspects of Philippine life, and which houses the Museum Bahay Tsinoy, the Chin Bin Si Memorial Library, and the Kaisa Research and Data Bank. The museum is located in Intramuros, Manila. She has written and co-authored 17 books, the most popular being Tsinoy, the Story of the Chinese in Philippine Life, a coffee table book that documents the history of the early Chinese immigrants and their transformation to today's Tsinoys, as well as 5 volumes of Chinese in the Philippines, Problems and Perspectives. She is, of course, more well known rather, for her anti-crime advocacy as the prime mover behind the Citizens' Action Against Crime and the Movement for Restoration of Peace and Order, 2 of the most active anti-crime NGOs. She likewise serves up to now as the executive chair of Manila's People Law Enforcement Board. It is therefore an honor and a distinct privilege to have the indefatigable and dynamic Ms. Teresita Angsi to share with us later on her views. Also this afternoon, we have as our first speaker the director of Bahay Tsinoy and the immediate past president of Kaisa. She teaches education courses at the College of Education of the De La Salle University and is currently taking doctoral studies at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the United States. Her work in the fields of culture and education spans 20 years and includes engagement with the public school sector and other museums around the country and abroad. She's likewise a sought-after speaker on a myriad of topics ranging from history, culture, and the teaching profession, and is a volunteer trainer for Bagong Kulturang Pinoy, a non-profit volunteer organization whose mission is to develop a reading culture and to promote literacy among children in poverty-stricken areas of the Philippines, where she trains public school teachers on teaching children how to read. Just last summer, for instance, she undertook many training activities on handling online classes and preparing online contents for virtual teaching. Friends and colleagues, we are very honored as well to have with us the equally dynamic Ms. Carmelea Angsi, to whom I will now turn over the floor. Ms. Angsi, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Medyo dami ko palang ginagawa. Busy masyado. Oops, hold on. Let me share my screen. So for today, I was given 20 minutes to talk about, 25 minutes to talk about the rare collections and the unique materials found in Bahay Tsinoy. Some of these materials are tangible and some are not. Okay, so let's proceed. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you keep these in mind and look for them when you come visit us when we reopen in 2022. The first treasure we have is the entire building, the entire museum, mainly because this is not ours. This is a treasure of the entire community. Everything from the ground up was built from funds donated by the Tsinoy community. It's not just a museum of the ethnic Chinese, but a Philippine history museum where we tell everyone our role as Tsinoys in the entire history and story of the Philippines. We are actually featured. We're featured a lot in different publications. This is one of our favorites, of course, because we were included in this publication, Museums of Southeast Asia. When a museum is recognized internationally by other museums, then you know that you've made it, that you know you are at par with global standards. Our second rare collection is the treasure is the Qingban Li ceramics collection. If you see this ewer here, this one, can you see my mouse there? That very, very pretty jar is one of our oldest pieces, circa Tang Dynasty. the uniqueness of the Qingban collection is that it's not just for looking. It's not just a collection. Ay, ceramics. No, it's not like that. This is a study collection. It it collected, we collected from every kiln that manufactured ceramics for the Philippine market. So this is very specific. Only kilns that manufactured for the Philippine market. And then all of these items were found here on the islands, not purchased in Hong Kong, not purchased in Singapore. Everything is from here. And so we have exquisite pieces like these in the picture. And we have pieces, if you're seeing the background, a very dark black coffee color bowl in the background. That's also one of the very rare pieces that we have because the kiln um, was operational for maybe just 50, 60 years. Okay, so this piece, even though the monetary value is not so high because it's considered one of the ugly pieces, it's very, very rare. Our third rare treasure is not tangible. We do not own these maps, but we do have extensive studies on the map. In fact, this Selden map, the one on the left, this is just the Philippine portion. It's a very big map. It was last in Singapore in 2019, the National Library of Singapore. It's owned by the Bodleian Library of Oxford University in the UK. Our studies on this into way back 2010 was the one that spurred a lot of the other studies because Bahay Chinoy researchers were the ones who pointed out that the words on the map should not be read in Mandarin but should be read in Hokkien. Okay, so that's one of the greatest contributions of Bahay Chinoy to the study of this map that is such a buzz right now in the world of sinology. Um, the we are also proposing, we're also theorizing that this map was created by a Sanglai here in the Philippines. Our fourth rare treasure are prints and photographs. These are rare from the 19th century. Some of them are purchased as newspaper framed newspaper, London Illustrated News, all depicting life in the Philippines, all depicting how the Chinese, the coolie labor was were how the coolie labor was being done here in the Philippines. It depicted what kinds of goods were being sold. It depicts the types of services that were being conducted, that were being done by the Sanglai during the Spanish period. Another one is this is just a copy. It's now available online. It's now Creative Commons. But back then, when we opened, the cost of acquiring a copy of this was just, butas wallet mo. Before the internet, this illustration only appeared in books. And during that time, when it appeared in books, the illustration only focused on up to the border with the leaves and the flowers and that animal on the corner. It never showed the words on top. It was only when Bahay Chinoy acquired a copy for the museum, for display in the museum, that we discovered, hey, there are words on top. And this is now part of our research that Sanglai comes from the word Shonglai, which is Hokkien for Changlai, a frequent visitor. This is owned by the Lilly Library of Indiana University. You can look it up online. Please just search Boxer Codex. This is a codex manuscript of illustrations of peoples in Southeast Asia. Rare treasure number 5 are rare books. Before digitization, this was very sought after. In UP, they use Jose Rizal, the Austin Craig Jose Rizal book as a textbook. But this is 1913, so it's 100 years old. It's now a very rare book, and we do have copies of this. Although we're also very happy that because of digitization, the Blair and Robertson collection about the Philippine Islands are now available on Project Gutenberg. Austin Craig's publication about Jose Rizal is also available online. We hope that in time, we we at Bahay Chinoy could raise enough funds to digitize our collections as well. I'll show you how much of these collections there are at the end, towards the end of this presentation. Um, these are copies of publications. These are some more of our rare treasures, copies of these publications. The Diccionario Bengsimpokam, which is the first book ever translated into Chinese from uh, uh, from Chinese to a European language. Okay, our studies on these are part of our treasures as well. Here are some more documents that we have. We do have 330. We just acquired 30,000 something pages of materials from the Beijing University archives. Yes, they were printed out, 30 something thousand pages printed out, because our Chinese researchers are analog. They cannot read on digital copies. Okay. Here is another one. Um, the Chinese book on top, the small one, is a compilation of ancient records from China. And this one on the bottom right, the dark green one with the blue stripe, are the Qing Dynasty Archives collection pertaining to Southeast Asia. This is volume 2 about the Philippines. Volume 1 is about Singapore. So our collections of these publications and our studies on these archival documents are quite valuable in contributing to the study of the Chinese in the Philippines. Okay, rare treasure number 6 would be actual documents, primary records and documents. We do have microfilms of Spanish documents, revolutionary Philippine revolutionary records. We were able to get copies of those from the National Archives. It was a very difficult and tedious research process to do that. But we also have other documents like baptismal records, wedding records, and then from the American period, we have more of that, like the Toadi. This is literally a 9 by 12 piece of paper called the a landing certificate of registration or residence that made you legal to be in the Philippines. Other manuscripts would be magazines, photographs. One of my favorites is quite unique and funny. It's one sheet music of a dance of foxtrot, and then the illustration is a China man with the cue at the back. So I don't know how to play an instrument, so I will show it to whoever is interested in playing whatever is on that music sheet. Okay, these are some more samples. On the left, the white paper is a deed of sale, okay, of property here in the Philippines. On the right are other identification cards and baptismal records. Number 7 will be our religious icons. These are icons that we collected because they were carved by Chinese artisans. Not in the picture are two vestments, one for a Christ statue and another one is a priest's vestment donated to us by the San Agustin Church when we opened in 1999. These are all crafted by Chinese artisans. How do we know? If you see on the leftmost, we have a Chinese looking Virgin Mary. On the right side is San Francisco. Sorry, I cut the picture off wrongly. But on top of the San Francisco carving is a lotus flower. So we have a lot of these types of iconography where there's a mixture of Chinese culture and a mixture of Chinese art and culture into Philippine Spanish Catholic religious artifacts. Number 8, antique pieces of furniture. One of our favorites is the bed. It's actually very pretty. It's not even the best quality, supposedly, of the bunch. This is called an atay bed. During the late Spanish period, if you are a mestizo and you have the funds for it, you show and be proud of your social class by having atay furniture in your bahay na bato. It's not enough that you have a stone house and that you have a carriage and horses. You have to have atay furniture to show your relatives and show your friends that you've made it. Now, this is your ultimate status symbol, the atay bed. I was fascinated when this bed was assembled here in the museum because all the four posts cannot be interchanged. They are inserted. One has a square hole, one has a round hole, other one is triangle, and then the other one is a hexagon. So those are, you cannot interchange the poles. And it's just amazing because not the bed has no nails. Um, a lot of the furniture during that time did not have nails. Another one of my favorites, it's not here in the picture, but are objects. Okay, and other antique pieces of furniture and owned by the Chinese are little objects, small objects like pots and plates that were brought here by the Chinese when they came and migrated to the Philippines. Rare treasure number 9. Um, Very few people see this because it's not inside the museum. It's too big to be inside. It's bigger than a car. It's outside the museum. The photo on the bottom is from a publication from the 1950s. And then on top is a sugarcane press that we purchased for the museum somewhere in Pampanga, I think. All right. So if you see that very big pole, horizontal pole, that's not for people. You tie a carabao at the end of that pole. And that's why, and that's how, that's to show you the dimension of this object, no? That you can fit a carabao to go around and around and around to press sugarcane. I love this piece. All right. Another rare treasure, which is sometimes my friends find it funny that I'm so proud that we have a collection of tombstones. They're not all ours. In Bahay Chinoy, we have 8 tombstones. 6 are the property of the Intramuros administration. I'm hoping that they forget about it and just leave it with us. Because when we opened when in the 1980s, there were 23 intact Chinese tombstones around the Intramuros area. By the time that we were going to open, we only found 6. And then over the years, we were able to acquire 2 more from different locations around the Philippines. I heard that there's one tombstone outside the Candaba Church in Pampanga. There's news about tombstones outside the Metro Manila, and these are all with Chinese inscriptions, mainly used as tombstones for Chinese migrants, and then eventually taken away from the tombstone and used as flooring in a lot of churches. Why? Because this is very hard stone. It's piedra china, Chinese granite. This is another treasure that we have. It's not about related to the tombstone. We were able to go to hire someone to go around all the Chinese cemeteries of the country in the 1980s to take pictures of all the tombstones somewhere there. And this yielded precious data. This is how we were able to plot, number 1, how many Chinese are there in the Philippines using tombstones, death records, and birth records as data. And then, secondly, where are the Chinese concentrated? Like that's how we found out that majority of the Go are in Cebu, that the Pe are in Palawan, things like that. That majority of the Pe are in Palawan. So these are the things that we found out, and we were also able to find out from here that 70% of the Chinese in the Philippines come from one county, Xinjiang County in China, in Fujian Province. 8. Rare treasure number 11, original Japanese paraphernalia. If you see the black sheets of paper, that should not exist. Officially, if you are a guerrilla and you receive a black sheet of propaganda paper, you're supposed to, if it's small enough, you're supposed to swallow it. If it's too big, you're supposed to burn it after reading. Whoever kept this was extremely, extremely brave because they would have been killed if any of these were found on their bodies by the Japanese soldiers. This table is just one of my favorite pieces. Yes, it looks like a table in your office, no? Right. Right before we opened, this table was still being used by the owner in his store. And one of our research directors went to the owner. He knew about this story. It can hide guns and documents under that table. And um, our research director went to the owner and said, give me your table. You buy a new one for your store. I'm taking your table for the museum. So just like that, we were able to acquire a table from a store owner who protected guerrillas during the war. Okay. All right. So rare treasure number 12, this is our library. This entire wall is about the Chinese in the Philippines, both in English publications and Chinese publications. If you see here in the center behind the electric fan, these are all theses and dissertations. And what's amazing to me is that we have original dissertations that eventually became published as books. And if you want to see so the original dissertations are thicker and are actually more extensive because they haven't gone through editing by a publisher. So a lot of the methodologies are there, and so when researchers know this. When they actually compare the published version with the dissertation version, because they get more information and more methodology and statistics from the dissertation version. And we have a lot of those here in our collections. So I'd like to show you that this is the rare vault, the vault for our rare books. And this is how much that I would like to digitize. I actually have here, you see these are untouched and should never be touched. The ones that are lying down because they need heavy restoration. These are some of the publications. Not all publications that are old are popular enough to be included in Project Gutenberg. And so we do have a lot of rare books in our collection that have not yet been digitized publicly by the publishers. And so we are in talks with, we do have moves and plans on digitizing majority of these. Unfortunately, we do not have enough funds to eventually provide storage. If you look at storage for rare books, those are just amazing and very hard to maintain. Okay. Another rare treasure is our microfilms of rare archival materials. We have the complete set of the Chinese commercial news from from its first publication in the 1930s up to up to year 2000s. Okay, and then recently they gave us um they gave us 10 stacks, 10 three two 3 feet high stacks of newspapers found in a Marcapina factory. Okay, and we are now going to approach the UCLA library for emergency funds to protect the pieces until they become digitized. Okay, so all of these archival materials are culled from the Philippine National Archives, from the China National Archives, Beijing University Archives, collection of Dr. Edgar Wickberg. And so the research, these are all seminal work and all primary research materials that can be used by researchers. And lastly, the first treasure that I mentioned, I showed you a picture of the building, and this is the inside of the building. In the introduction earlier, it was mentioned that we were so busy 2020. So while every other museum was moving toward online exhibitions and online activities, we were not, because all our staff and all our volunteers are so busy packing PPE, personal protective equipment. So if you see the boxes on the left with plastic wrapping, every hospital will get a minimum of 4 balikbayan boxes worth of PPE. That's the smallest On average, a hospital will get around 100 sets. When we say PPE, it's the bunny suit, headgear, goggles, mask, footwear, gloves, and alcohol and soap. Okay, so these are we were so busy with this, we weren't able to go, the museum wasn't able to go digital. Okay, uh, moving forward, it's really Bahay Chinoy. Bahay Chinoy's mandate is really to look at where we are, to place the Chinoy in the entire tapestry of the Philippine story. Where are we really? And to help the young generation Chinoys find their place. Where do you position yourself? What is your culture? What is your tradition? And this is what Bahay Chinoy does for them. For our Philippine audiences, it reduces a lot of the misunderstanding where, oh, so that's who they are. And those are the best words that we hear when audiences exit the doors of the museum. Okay. We are upgrading. So shameless plug. We are upgrading and renovating. We're supposed to open in January 2022. We just finished demolition of our third floor last week, and our teams are ready. Our design teams are ready to install stuff. Expect a brighter and more extensive collection from Bahay Chinoy this January 2022. Thank you very much, everybody. Please follow us on our social media accounts. That's Bahay Chinoy on Facebook and Twitter. Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran for the organization on Facebook, Bahay Chinoy Museum on Instagram. See you there.
Okay. Um, do I continue now? Sorry.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
You have the floor, Mrs. Angsi.
Okay, so you see my screen already? Okay, you see
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doming, for that very heartwarming introduction. You did your work very well. And thank you for inviting Maya and me to present here in before very big business magnates and business leaders, members of Vignettes. Thank you very much. So my portion is on the shared history, shared destiny, and shared heritage of the Tsinoys and the Filipinos. Okay, three parts. I will not discuss the second part, already discussed by Maya. The first part is on the shared technology, history, and destiny. And the third part would be the shared heritage and cultural legacy. Okay. I have 25 minutes. Okay, I'm looking now. So okay. These four pictures, if you guess that this is Banawe rice terraces, you are wrong. Okay. The first one is Miagao, Iloilo. The second one is Kudkud, Negros Occidental. The third one is in Antique. The fourth one is in Biliran. Okay. So now guess which one is Banawe? Okay, guess. Okay. This one is Vietnam, the first one. The other one is Yunnan. And then this one is Quezon. And this one is Banawe. And this one is Tayabas. Why did we show these rice terraces?
to show the common technology shared by our ancient ancestors. The rice terraces technology that moved from northern China to southern China to Vietnam, all the way to the Asia Pacific region. So even in the Philippines, the Banawe rice terraces is unique because it's a whole mountain range carved into rice terraces. But all over Southeast Asia, you do find this as a technology that we shared in common. Okay, even the engineering feat of bringing the water down from the top of the mountain downwards through the terraces is something that we shared in common. Okay, then this one, you know that there is a Carabao Center in Muñoz, Nueva Ecija. Okay, mother of Philippine Carabao is Chinese. We did not say that. Don't get angry at us. We did not say that. But the Nueva Ecija Carabao Center tested the DNA and discovered that the mother of the Philippine Carabao is actually Chinese. Okay? What happened? Because of the Filipino-American Civil War, the last Carabao was slaughtered for food. Because there's famine, there's drought, there's civil war, so there's no more Carabao, and the Philippines imported the Carabaos from China. Each of the stories that I will be telling, most of them are vignettes, is a whole lecture in itself. So these photos, these stories that I'm telling you are but a microcosm, a shortened version or teasers. We give lecture on the whole topic if we are requested by the history department during history week, or we give these lectures nationwide. Okay, we told the Muñoz Nueva Ecija, you need not test the DNA because the whole story on why the Philippine Carabao is Chinese can be found in this book discussed by Maya a while ago. Okay. It tells about how the documents and how the American government imported the Carabaos from China. Then we have the third story now from the rice terraces, the Carabao. This is the third story. Okay, you remember the Balangiga bells? We were so happy 2 years ago when they were returned to their rightful place. But very few people know the connection of the Balangiga bells with Beijing, okay? The Boxer Rebellion in Beijing, which erupted in 1900, okay? Yung Balangiga bells was 1901, remember? Okay, what happened? The American soldiers who went to Samar, to Balangiga, actually just returned from China at the conclusion of their mission. In fact, they were from the Philippines. They were sent to China to quell the Boxer Rebellion, the Boxer Uprising. Okay, after Boxer Uprising, they were very notorious back home in China. The same C Company of the 9th Infantry, okay? They did in Samar what they did in China, the pillage, the atrocious acts, the killing of the raping of women, killing of children. So they repeated their depraved act, which they did in China, and did it in Samar, which angered, of course, the Filipino revolutionists and the Filipino fighters and local guerrillas, of course, cut them down inside the church in 1901. Okay, so in this battle, one of the really few battles scored by Filipino soldiers against American forces was during this Balangiga Summer event, no, where the Balangiga bells were later stolen by the later taken by the American soldiers as booty. Okay, what the Samareños did not know was that in killing the American soldiers, they avenged the Chinese. They took revenge on these Company C, who killed many Chinese in Beijing, China. Okay? Of course, Balangiga paid dearly and because of the massacre that happened after the killing of the American soldiers, and the bells were taken as war booty. But this only highlighted the fact that we are connected in many, many ways. There were intertwining destiny, there were common history, intertwining fate throughout history. No, this is the highlight. In fact, I often posit to say that the Filipinos could have succeeded in the Filipino-American War because the American commander wanted to pull out more soldiers, 10,000 soldiers from the Philippines to China to stifle the Boxer uprising. Okay? But of course, General Arthur MacArthur said, if you pull out even just one battalion, there is grave danger that we might lose the entire island. Imagine they really acknowledge that they almost lost the Philippines had they sent the soldiers to China, more soldiers to China to stifle the Boxer uprising. No, that's another vignettes in our common intertwining history and destiny. Okay, the second part, I will jump over this because Maya has discussed this, but an important part in these ancient records will be the story of the Sultan of Sulu who visited China to pay tribute to Emperor Yongle in 1417. Remember the date 1417? That's 100 years before Magellan lost his way and eventually found the Philippines. Okay? So the Sultan of Sulu visited China in 1417. He arrived in October and November. On his way back home to Sulu, he died in Shantung and was buried in Shantung, China. It was almost winter, and I think they were wearing their traditional wear. So he died most probably of pneumonia. Okay, he was given an imperial burial by the King Yongle and buried in Shantung, China. The only tomb of a foreign monarch still existing in China, and where a whole village of his descendants uh, are standing watch and keeping their Muslim faith is here in Pezhou, Shantung, China. Because when he died, his second son and third son had to stay behind for ancestor worship and filial piety, and they continued to stay on in China while the eldest son went back to Sulu to be the Sultan. Okay? It's a long, long, long story. If you want, pardon the plugging, you can buy this small booklet from Kaisa with a lot of pictures showing the journey of the Sultan of Sulu from Sulu to China, then back, and then, of course, in 2005, during the 40th year of diplomatic relations, the descendants of the Sultan of Sulu found their way back home to Sulu. We brought them from Beijing. They went from Shantung. They flew to Beijing. From Beijing to Xiamen to Manila, Manila to Zamboanga, Zamboanga to Jolo, and that is how long the travel is. But of course, we brought them to Malacanang Palace because their ancestor paid tribute to the emperor in China. Okay, so I have to be quick about the remaining part. I'm halfway. Yeah, halfway. Thank you. So that's the third. The fourth story is about Limahong. It's a favorite of many people. Of course, Filipino and Spanish accounts all claim that Limahong was intended to invade the Philippines and conquer the Philippines, wrest Philippine control from the Spaniards. But is it true? Okay, I don't know. Could he be just a folk hero seeking refuge in the Philippines? Maybe, because he was wanted by the prefects of Guangdong and Fujian, who were competing on who will catch him first because there was a big reward on his head. Okay, but Limahong had 3,000 well-organized men. He had cannons. Manila was caught by surprise and was unprepared, but he opted to retreat, okay, to retreat and not to use his cannons to bombard and flatten Intramuros, and instead retreated to Lingayen, okay? It's just another story about him refusing to use his superior firepower. His men were very well trained. Could it be he did not want to destroy Manila? Could it be he did not want to quarrel with Spaniards? But he only wanted the Spaniards to give him a refuge because he was wanted back home in China. Okay? I'm not saying this is true because these are conundrums in history, but this is just a look at another way of looking at Philippine history, because there might be accounts that we miss because most of these are from Chinese accounts, while what we knew are from Spanish accounts. Okay, so let me move to the third portion of my third and last portion of my sharing. This is a scene in our museum, Bahay Chinoy, showcasing the heritage and cultural legacy of the Chinese in Philippine life. Okay, Father Miguel de Benavides said the true treasures that the Chinese contributed to the Philippines is not the silk, the silver, but the books, the wisdom, the virtues of just government that they introduced to the Philippines. Okay? So it is not an accident that the first three books published in the Philippines, two were in Spanish and Chinese, Doctrina Christiana and Lengua China, um, which is the counterpart of Doctrina Christiana en Lengua Tagala, and another book on Sulu, Apologia de la Verdadera Religión. As I said, it's one whole lecture altogether. We will be delivering one in the International Conference on 500 Years of Christianity. So it is not an accident either that the first Filipino saint and being proposed to be the first Filipina saint, both of them were half Chinese. Their fathers were pure Filipinos, and that the Ilustrados who led the revolution, the Trece Martires, the Gombursa, General Emilio Aguinaldo, all of them were of Chinese ancestry. Of course, we are not saying that we are laying claim to them, but this is a true fact in Philippine history that our Ilustrados, because they were upper middle class, they were able to study in Ateneo, in Letran, in UST, or study abroad in Madrid, in Barcelona, and everywhere. So they were educated, they got the liberal ideas of the West and led the revolution. Of course, they led the revolution not as Chinese mestizos, but as Filipinos, Malay native Filipinos. Okay, so you have other revolutionaries, Yenko, Macabulos, the Trece Martires, who are all of Chinese descent, including Emilio Aguinaldo. In fact, the foremost Chinese reformist Liang Qizhao, there's pages and pages of this. It's one lecture that I gave on how the Chinese revolutionists look up to the Filipinos. Okay? Liang Qizhao said, I must kowtow myself and prostrate myself on the ground to pay tribute to the Filipino revolutionists who dared to fight two foreign masters. That is the Spaniards, then later on the Americans. Okay. Then, of course, the Japanese occupation. You know that in the darkest hour of the Japanese occupation, the Filipinos and the Chinese fought side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in the Philippine defense for freedom. A vignette that few people know was in the Nanjing massacre. Remember that the 3 million Chinese killed in Nanjing in the rampage of massacre of the Japanese. 2 of them were actually caught in the Philippines and sent back for trial. These two were the most notorious because they were competing who will kill the first 100 in Nanjing. Okay, when they met, one killed 106, the other killed 105. But who killed the first 100? They could not agree. So they said, let's have another contest, start from number one again. But fortunately, they were arrested in Leyte after the war and sent back to China for trial and were executed. Okay, moving to contemporary times, I don't have to mention that many of our leaders were of Chinese descent. Corazon Cojuangco, Aquino, Cardinal Jaime Cardinal Sin, Claudio Tihanqui. So executive, religious, and judiciary, and many of our legislative leaders, and even now our military leaders, General Vicente Lim, the first graduate of West Point, first Filipino graduate of West Point, of course, is half Chinese too. Okay, then what is more visible in our cultural exchange than food? Okay, Maya has a very good lecture on this, the indigenization of Chinese food, how the Chinese food became Pinoy. Okay, noodles, the Cantonese noodle became pancit canton, pancit habhab, pancit malabon, pancit negra, and all these things. Okay, because they were contributed by the Chinese, but the Filipinos indigenized and transformed them. Okay. B is rice, staple of China, staple also of the Philippines. So a lot of the food in using rice are in Chinese terms: biko, bilao, bilo, bitai, bitso. B is Chinese for rice. Okay, biam. Okay, it's rice broth, yung gatas ng bigas. Okay, so they have Chinese names because they were introduced by the Chinese. So it is not one way. Remember, I mentioned about the Philippine Carabao is Chinese, but the other way is also true. No, the Filipinos also contributed to China. If you travel to Xiamen during winter and you see sidewalk vendors selling roasted kamote, mainit yung kamote, you buy them because it's so hot, you put them to warm your hands. The vendors, if they know you come from the Philippines, will say thank you. And you sometimes puzzle why are these vendors thanking the Filipinos? Because it's the Philippine lowly kamote that saved Fujian in a big famine at one time, because the Chinese traders brought home kamote shoots and planted them in Xiamen, and then the kamote grew very fast and saved them from famine. So that's the food, okay? So not just the food, vegetables. Okay, I think I jump over this one. Okay, the the opening of Cannon Road. You see 3,000 feet, walang harness. They were opening up Cannon Road using dynamite. How many Chinese died to open the Cannon Road? And after the opening of the Cannon Road, they stayed behind and married the Highland lasses and raised vegetables. So it's not, again, an accident that most of our vegetables are in Hokkien terms. Gu chai, pe chai, kun chai. Opo is opo, of course, sitaw, batao. So all of these names, and kinship terms. Impo, ingkong, betsin, ditche, hikaw. He is ear, cow is ring, so earring is hikaw. Okay, bimpo, bin is face, po is cloth, face cloth is bimpo. So I will end my sharing there with these last 3 slides to show how the contemporary Tsinoys actually evolved. First, from Huashang and Huakong, the Sangleng, or in other words, they were the early OCW, Overseas Chinese Workers. The Huakong that opened up Cannon Road, the Huakong who planted the vegetables, who were our launders, our church builders. Okay, one lasting technology that they introduced was the building in stones, okay? Stone buildings, the churches, even Malacanang Palace, building of stones made by these Chinese artisans, okay? The early OCWs. Now, baliktad na. We have OFWs working in Chinese language speaking communities. In the American occupation, they're called Huaqiao. Huaqiao is Huaqiao is temporary sojourners. They all want to go back home to China, so they were derogatorily called Inchik. Okay, then these Huaqiao became mestizos and became Filipino Chinese in the during the independence era. But after 1975, the Filipino Chinese became Chinese Filipinos, Filipino in identity, but Chinese in racial heritage and origins. And we coined the word Chinoy, Chinong Pinoy, to differentiate them from the Chinese nationals from the Songkuren or Tiongkok lang who hold PRC passport, because we are Chinese Filipinos, we are Filipinos in identity, yet proud of our Chinese heritage and our Chinese ancestry. Okay? It's just like the Peranakans of Indonesia and the Babas of Malaysia. We coined the word Chinoy. We, Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran, coined and popularized Chinoy in 1992 to differentiate them from the Chinese who hold Chinese passport, like the new immigrants, the POGO workers, the new OCWs. Okay? So in conclusion, history tells us about the intertwining fate and destinies through the centuries. What happened in one area, of course, affected the other. The Filipino-American Civil War, of course, we had drought, we had famine, we imported Carabao from China. During the Boxer Uprising, they sent the Filipino soldiers to fight in China. In fact, in Shanghai, there's a street called Manila Street because some of the soldiers who were conscripted to fight in the Boxer Rebellion refused to fight when they learned that the Boxers were peasants like them. No? So they hid. Nag-awol sila and they stayed on in Shanghai. So there's a Manila Street commemorating them. So as the Chinoy community evolves to become one of the country's cultural communities, their norms and forms of their cultural heritage became a component of Philippine national culture. In fact, in the whole tapestry of Philippine national culture, you find the threads, you find the wolves and the warps of Chinese influences there. As our Kaisa Credo says, our blood may be Chinese, but our roots grow deep in Philippine soil. Our bonds are with the Filipino people. So thank you very much. That ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Angsi and Maya, for the very fresh and interesting insights, sidelights, highlights, etc. You know, this is a very rare opportunity for us. It's not every day that we have a mother and daughter team presenting to us both equally knowledgeable and experts in the same field. So this is quite a privilege, and we'd like to thank both of you for joining us this afternoon, as well as agreeing to spend a little more time for our open forum. Let me start, Mrs. Angsi, on the Chinese across the region, no? Because it is not just Chinese in the Philippines, but there are Chinese, as you said, in Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. And I'm wondering whether there's a certain homogeneity among the Chinese across the region. Are there significant differences in the way the Chinese in these different countries of ASEAN, for example, in the way they have adapted to and influenced the way of life in their host countries? And then looking at it from the other side, are there significant differences also in the way their host countries have embraced or did not embrace the Chinese migrants?
Well, in terms of the integration, for example, the Philippines is unique in Southeast Asia. I think we have the best, the process of integration that happened because it was not forced by the government. it was not forced by legislative fiat, unlike in Indonesia, in Thailand, you even have to change your name. Surya Dinata, Bunsanong, all of these were Chinese surnames. You were even forced to integrate. But here, it is a very smooth process, okay? A natural sociological process because we form only 1.2% of the Filipino population. So it's a very small number. Remember the massacres during the Spanish time, then the Chinese exclusion law in the American regime. So we're a very small number. Now, in terms of the integration process, those in the provinces are more successful. Doming will know that his family come from Cebu. They are more integrated than the Manila Chinese because the Manila Chinese, there's a bigger community. So in the Manila, we retain more, for example, the Hokkien as our as a speaking language, as a language, as a language of the community. But in the provinces, they pretty much lost the Hokkien speaking ability. In the Chinese schools now, they are promoting the teaching of Mandarin. So there are also differences. But unique
But this would be within the regions in the Philippines.
in the Philippines.
Okay.
The processes are, some are very successful. In Pampanga, no, you have the Tuasons, the Disons,
Yes.
in Pangasinan. They are very well integrated already. And then sometimes also even the businesses are different because they always feel the needs of where they are. So in Mindanao, you have a lot of people in plantations, banana plantation, in agriculture. The biggest hybrid rice plantation is in Bukidnon and all these things. Diba? So there are differences.
Yes.
So we are not homogeneous. So people sometimes think, kasi kayo mga Chinese
Cut from the same cloth, yes.
are as different from any other. In fact, if you think, let's say, of the Taipans, Henry C. John Gokowin and all these retail magnates, they are competitors, no? We may be Chinoys, but we contribute differently. We retain our cultures differently. Some are more advanced. Some have lost their Chineseness, but some are trying to reclaim now. So iba-iba pa rin.
Before I ask you my follow-up question, let me just encourage our attendees to type in their questions in the Q&A box. We'd encourage you to please take the opportunity of asking questions to our mother and daughter tandem. This is, as I said, not a common occurrence for us here in Phoenix. But let me jump to the region, as in the ASEAN region, and I would be interested to know how the Chinese would differ in the way, as I said, they've influenced the way of life of their host countries, or the way they have adapted to their host countries, and the way the host countries have actually accepted or refused to accept them, or refused to integrate them into the mainstream of their societies.
Well, Malaysia and Indonesia and Chinese had a hard time. At least after the divide and rule policy of our colonial masters, the Spaniards, the Americans, and the Japanese, after the war, we have a more liberal policy towards accepting the Chinese, and we had the best of luck compared to the Chinese in Indonesia and in Malaysia. Now, one big difference is that we are a very Hispanized Hollywood. Like the Filipinos, we are very influenced by the Spanish Christianity. 90% of the Chinese Filipinos are Christians, whether Protestants or Catholics. Of course, some of the Catholics practice a syncretic kind of religion where they can still practice Taoism, Confucianism as folk tradition, but then embrace Christianity. So those are the difference in the ASEAN. But Christianity is a factor in the successful integration, just like in Thailand. Buddhism is a factor why the Thais are very much well integrated into Thai society.
Let me cite a few statistics, and let's try and see how this connects to what you just mentioned. in comparing the Chinese across the ASEAN region. I read the highlights of the Hurun report. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. HURUN. This is a British who releases his Hurun report. I think Hurun is his name in China. And it's a popular report that lists it comes out with a Hurun rich list that focuses on the Chinese in mainland China as well as in the, I think, in the Asian region. Anyway, in the last report that came out, these were the statistics that were released. 45% of the billionaires in the Philippines are of Chinese origin. This compares with 65% in Singapore, about 25% in both Indonesia and Malaysia, and only 10% in Thailand. So I'm curious now to see how, the previous explanation that you gave, would affect the kind of wealth concentration or distribution that was reported in the Hurun report.
Okay, thank you for that question, Malu. But before I answer, maybe I'll ask the audience if you have questions for Maya. She should be first because she has a class at 4 o'clock. She has to leave the.
Can I ask? Can I ask one? What time do you need to leave?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Do you want to ask Maya the questions first so she can leave earlier and then have all the questions intended for you, Ms. Angsi, later after Maya's done? Will that be more comfortable for you? Because I do have a few questions for Maya, and then I'll check our Q&A box for questions that are intended for her.
Oh, Maya, what do you think?
It's fine. I just have to leave at exactly 4.
Okay, because we're supposed to be done. Our hard stop is at 4. Okay, so
All right,
in that
then
case,
go.
we can
Mother,
go
you
back.
answer.
Okay, we go back to your answer,
Yeah,
Mrs.
it's a very good question. In fact, number one, even the Forbes list, we always question it. The same as the Hurun list. Where do they get those statistics and those facts? They get it from your annual report. None of them will report, for example, what are the liabilities of these owners, okay? And then none of them will see what is behind. It's not, because when I speak sometimes like this, people would think I'm trying to separate, no? How many Chinese own a big chunk of Makati, like the Ayalas? Even if you don't earn a single centavo, even if you lost everything during the pandemic, you still have to pay the Ayala Corporation for the use of the land. I don't think there's any Chinese still who can claim that they own such a huge chunk of prime property like the Ayalas in Makati, the Aranetas, the whole Araneta Commercial Center in Cubao. And it's just that behind those figures are things that you do not see. Okay?
So you don't want to put too much
because those are inaccurate
to the numbers.
Stories. Hindi naman yan pinapakita on.
Are they overstated or understated?
I think in some they are very understated, in some they are overstated. No, okay, because
yes.
For example, for the C family, you put them as a big chunk, but the C family is already a huge conglomerate. There are many other C's. It's not just the C family owning, for example, the real estate, the SM investments, and all these things, but they lump it together. But why don't they lump together when you talk about, for example, Rason, no? Sunny Rason. You don't lump everything in the Rason. Iba-iba yan, iba-ibang chunks. But for Chinese Filipinos, that's the problem of the Chinese. It's a mistake even of the Chinese in Southeast Asia. It's a false claim
Mm-hmm.
To say that the
Okay.
Chinese really own that much and we control that much. They want to blow up the Chinese share in the economy, which is not true and not based in fact and could be very dangerous. Because SM, for instance,
Understood.
who benefits from if SM grow even much more? Who will benefit? All the employment are for Filipinos. A restaurant open in SM is the Filipino waiters, the Filipino cooks who will earn more. And where do their money go? They flow back to the Philippines. Okay? San Miguel Corporation. Is it less Filipino because it's owned by because it's being run by a Ramon Ang? Okay? Is Mercury Drug less Filipino because it's owned by Mariano Ke? The customers are all Filipinos. The workers are all Filipinos. The capital is Filipino. The profits are flowed to the Philippines. So why do you have to highlight the ethnicity of these own?
Mm-hmm.
But you
Mm-hmm.
don't do that for others. Why don't you say American Filipinos? Why don't you say the Muslim Filipinos in Mindanao who own a lot of properties? Why don't you say the Spanish Filipinos? We should
Can
not.
I ask a corollary question to that? Is there a perceived racism behind it?
It's a rising concern. Okay, I have delivered two papers on the rise of China and the increasing rise in racial conflicts. The Philippines, the Chinese Filipinos have the best of the whole Southeast Asia because we didn't have the massacres, we didn't have the eruption of racial riots uh, in our memory. Okay, the post-war. But then, because of the rise of China and because of politicians, the undercurrents of racism are starting to rise.
Mm-hmm.
The politicians are very fond of making use of that, playing the racist card. Of course, that probably before the 90s, when you are a candidate, you play the racist card. But now, baliktad. You play the racist card and say, I have Chinese blood in me. But before that, in the 70s and 80s, when you run for election, you denounce your Chinese ancestry because your rivals will always raise that as a card against you. But now you reclaim that. So we have the best of both worlds. Huwag lang gamitin kasi for political agenda. And then you have the racial conflict, no? Especially in the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
no?
Yeah.
Blaming the China blaming. Okay, the virus knows no nationality, knows no border. It affects the world. It affects mankind. We suffer just as the Chinese suffered.
Okay,
May
let
Can
me
I
I
ask.
add
can
something?
I can I
Oh, go
just
ahead. Go
add
ahead,
something
Leah.
on the racism issue? I always say this when it's brought up in terms of ethnicity and being the general public pointing out ethnicity.
Yeah.
There has to be a balance. We're proud of being Chinoy. We are ethnic Chinese. But when the general public points out ethnicity issues in issues where ethnicity do not matter, then there is an undertone of racism. There is an undertone of an othering. Like, you're not Filipino, you're maputi, you're singkit. No, so there's an othering there. It's not outright racism. It's just an undercurrent and an
Undercurrent.
undertone and a sort of frame of
Because
mind
it's
that
never
you are
expressed, it's
an
never
other.
overt. Mm-hmm.
Yes, you are.
Mm-hmm.
And
How do we rectify that?
to be more conscious of, is it an ethnicity issue or not? When you asked earlier about economics and all that, is ethnicity a factor in making
Yes.
money? Right? If I
Where is
want
the
to make
what is the
money,
angle? What is the slant?
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
if it's about economy, if it's about making money, is ethnicity a factor? If ethnicity is a factor, then the numbers should be the same across Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mia, can I interrupt and ask something? This is
Yes.
somehow related to economics and making money. The history of the Chinese, not just in the Philippines, but I guess across the world, is a history of migrants. We know that they've uprooted themselves from their homeland, moved to strange lands without support systems to lean on, and that I guess forced entrepreneur, forced them to become more entrepreneurial, more hardworking, more persevering, because it was a matter of survival. Of course, eventually they did not just survive; they actually thrived. Uh, the Chinoys of this current generation, your generation, Maya, have grown up in a different set of circumstances. How has this affected your entrepreneurial spirit? Has it dampened, diminished, negated? What was really the entrepreneurial fire that was brought about by need?
I'll go back to the ethnicity issue. What you're describing is a migrant issue, not an ethnicity issue. Because all over the world, it's the same banana. The Chinese would go out into the world because of need. The grass is greener over there. But depending on the situation of the country they ended up in, then the outcomes are all different. Which means it's not ethnicity. Because if it's ethnicity, then whatever happens, dapat everyone is rich, right? Or everyone is an entrepreneur, or everyone has made it, right? So again, it depends on where they end up in. They could have suffered. No, the Chinese in Africa, for example, were the silent minority because of apartheid. They were not
Yes.
black, but they were not white, but they have fair skin. So they have to be very, very, very quiet so that nobody notices them and survive, right? So you have these things. So again, it's about that's a migrant thing. In
Mhm.
terms of my generation here, we're pretty much if you look at stories of second generation migrants across the world, it's the same. We are second generation migrants. Our parents have made it. And so we live more comfortable lives. And
Yes.
that's our growth. Again, still dependent on how our host country is treating us. We're very lucky here in the Philippines because our parents were given citizenship. In other countries, they don't. And so they continue to struggle
Yes.
as far as second, third generation.
Can we talk? Let me shift to culture and influences. We know that the Chinese art and culture have influenced the Philippine way of life. We see it in our cuisine, we see it in our art, we see it in fashion, but all across the centuries, maybe from pre to the Spanish colonial period, has the Malay culture been integrated, and has it influenced the Chinese art, customs, traditions in the Philippines? Because we're seeing more of the Chinese influencing our way of life, but assuming that there was, in fact, real palpable Malay culture back in the day, did you see that kind of influence moving the other way?
Kay mother yan.
It,
Tessie,
it's always two way. Cultural exchange is always
Yes,
two way. So,
yes. But was
inclusive
it very
is very
palpable? I mean,
obvious, diba?
did you
Even
see it much more obviously so
in
from
music,
Malay?
music. Listen to Jose
Okay.
Marichan's music. Ta 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 tan tan ta ta. It's very simple.
But we don't notice it.
You don't notice it because
Oh.
best of of Chinese culture is already part and parcel of Philippine culture. That's why you can no
Which is
longer
the best kind of meshing,
yeah, the
where
best
you
kind of
don't notice it, but it's there.
look at the Chinese Filipino way of celebrating Chinese New Year, di ba? Of celebrating, for example, Christmas. and
Mm.
honoring the dead. No, a lot of these, the predominant is already the Christian way. No, yung ancestor customs namin dati. Or even during the funeral, for example, you have a Philippine Catholic mass, but you still have burning of incense and
Yes, yes.
everything. But because of the influence of the Filipino, the predominant way you practice is already the Philippine way, no?
So you don't see any more, I mean,
Very universal
oo,
eh. Sometimes,
nag-blend na ng gusto.
yung kanina tinatanong mo, yung industry, yung entrepreneurial, these are
Universal
universal, no?
qualities.
But
Yes,
when you end up in the United States, you become engineers, you become doctors, professionals, mostly
yes, yes.
because the Jews are in the business, no? And the Native Americans are business. But in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, merchant community, the merchant mentality is very strong, especially in the Philippines. Because of the American Chinese exclusion law, only merchants and sons of merchants can come to the Philippines. So it's not an accident. Bakit karamihan businessmen? You cannot own
Okay.
land, you cannot
Oo.
own property,
Yes, yes, yes.
you can
There's a
only
context. There's a
Oo.
context to how
Historical
this
roots yan.
developments have
Yeah.
evolved. I'm curious. There was a Claveria decree, no, that mandated the use of Spanish and I think certain indigenous names that were supposed to be taken from a catalog. Where did this apply to the Chinese as well? Did most of the Chinese also adopt Spanish names during the Spanish colonial period? Maya, would you?
Yes, it was. If you are baptized as Christian, you have to take on a Christian name. And that's how they started putting together their last name and make it three syllables. So it's more Spanish sounding.
I
Pihanki,
see.
Kohuangko,
Mm-mm.
Limtuako, all of those. A lot of them, the migrant was probably here during the Spanish period, got converted to Christianity and had to take on a Spanish sounding last name.
Mm-hmm.
Even the palangkas, there are 5 different palangkas. The original palanca is an officer of the Spanish a Spanish officer, and then the Carlos Palanca Tan Tien Shen, a Chinese community leader, and then another Palanca. Both of them had the Spanish officer as their ninong, and so they're both Carlos Palanca, but they're totally unrelated.
La Condena,
Yes,
There
yes,
you go.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Chinese superstitious beliefs and practices, and I'm curious to know um, how much of what are being practiced now would trace back to the Spanish colonial period? Or has this also evolved significantly over time where what are being practiced now are totally different from what, were actually being practiced previously?
I have one. I always
Uh-uh.
say this in my food talks kasi I find it super funny. Okay, everybody, how many of you prepare the bilog-bilog on New Year? The round fruits on New Year,
Yes.
right? Chinese tradition. No.
Okay.
The Chinese prepare in China, even up to now, they prepare fresh food, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. In some regions in northern China, they have fresh flowers. The bilog-bilog is Spanish because you have to take
Except it's
12
attributed to the
grapes.
Chinese, mistakenly so.
Yes. You have
Oo.
to take 12 grapes at midnight. So
Oo.
one piece of grape per stroke of midnight. And then it's a very Spanish tradition. And then of course we don't have grapes here, so it evolved into any round fruit, I
Oo.
guess. And then I don't know when or why it became Chinese. Yun.
Conversely naman, what are the traditions and practices that are pala Chinese but we don't ascribe to the Chinese? Some common
I'm not sure. Mother, meron ba?
A lot kasi are already embedded as Filipino practice.
Mm.
Like filial piety, iba lang siguro yung sa uh, yung pagmamano, di ba? Yung
Yes.
nagmamano tayo. But for the Chinese, they will use it differently, but it's the same respect for the elders. Yung pagtitipid, di ba? You always say that the Chinese are very frugal. But look at the OFWs when they go abroad, di ba? They also save and save and save so that they
Mm.
can send money back home. Yan yung more on the merchant influence. There's a lot of things that introduced from the Philippines to China. They call sewing machine singer in China. Kasi the Chinese is
Because,
singer.
oh,
Alam
yes,
mo ba singer?
yes.
Um,
Singer, oo. Parang toothpaste
yung
Colgate.
pera,
Oo.
tatanong nila, peso bo. May pera ka ba? Peso. Kasi Philippine peso dinala sa China. So, peso bo. Meron ka bang pera?
Oo, yes, yes, oo.
So a lot of the Filipino things, you don't even know that na Filipino pala.
Mm-mm.
Butikan, we say butikan is bote, kanto, kat is kanto, mga ganon. So if you are in China and then you speak Chinese, sometimes they find it so strange kasi you're speaking words in Tagalog pala. You don't
That
know
you don't realize is actually not Chinese, Tagalog. Oo. Okay, we do have a list of questions that I will need to start reading. But before I do so, just very quickly, Maya, what does it take to run a museum? Because I think in the chat box, there were, statements of support to the museum. And I think it would be good for us to understand what it really takes to run a museum.
People.
And the
We
resource.
really
Yes, I
need
mean, what kind of
people.
organization do you need? What
Beyond
funding is
beyond
necessary to
resources,
support the organization?
assuming that we have funding, let's pretend that we do. Then the next most important the most important will be the people who run the museum. Skills are trainable, so we can um, there needs to be a certain passion and a certain desire to be in a museum
Do they
rather
need to
than
be trained academically in certain,
well,
degrees?
if the here in the Philippines kasi we don't have, I think only UP offers museum studies. Okay, so we do have that.
Mm-hmm.
But barring that, then UP also has arts management. But barring that, then what we need are people who are passionate about history, culture, and educating the public about history and culture.
Yes, yes.
Because the passion and the desire to do things are things that you cannot teach. The other skills, marketing, writing, putting
Mm.
together an
That's
exhibit,
normal.
these are teachable. Yeah.
Yes, yes. But how big an organization do you need to maintain to run your museum?
Well, I'm labeled as director, but I've always been a volunteer. I'm on volunteer status. And
Is that
staff
the same for
wise,
some of the other people in the museum, that they're really doing it out of the goodness of their hearts and a desire
no,
to
I think only
contribute?
for us. Only
Mm-mm.
for us. Only because I'm able to work part time. I just work part time. I teach part time naman eh. So
Mhm. Okay.
um, but what's this? In terms of crew, in terms of staffing, we have very minimal staffing, which is super kulang.
Mhm.
We have like four, five,
Yes.
one, two, three, four. Sorry, four people working, and only two of them work exclusively for the museum. Yeah, the
And
others like the maintenance and finance, iba pa yan siya.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it it's not inexpensive. It's not easy to run a museum, but those who wish to help, I think May has flashed the contact information. Okay, let me now go to the some of the questions here in our box. Do you know why the Sultan of Holo visited the emperor? Was it a state visit of an equal? You know, emperor to emperor or sultan to an emperor, Mrs. Angsi?
Yeah, that's why he was given an imperial burial. The first tribute mission of the king is the king of Butuan in 1003, 500 years before Magellan. You see that is a pride of Philippine history, that in the as early as 1003, you already have leaders, sultans, king of Butuan, who can sail across the seas, build sturdy ships to sail across the seas to pay tribute to the emperor.
How long did it take for the sultan to get to China? Would you know?
uh, a month's travel because they have to look for provisions. Kasi they
Uh,
cannot put enough in one. If you saw the film Hari sa Hari, Lahi sa Lahi, starring Rosemary Sonora, before your time yan.
19,
That is the
1970
story of
siguro, oo.
that is the story of the Sultan of Sulu. We put up that small booklet during the 600 year of the visit of the Sultan of Sulu 2017. Kasi nga, it's very memorable, a tribute to the Philippines on how advanced our civilization was. Diba? The
Yes.
Spaniards said, you destroy everything because these are all barbarian culture. But we are so advanced already, and we are well known in China and all parts of Southeast Asia, enough for us to sell our goods there. The first mention of a place in the Philippines is Bae Laguna,
Mm.
which found its in the Guangzhou record on the trade goods, merchandise brought by Filipino traders to sell in Guangzhou, China. No, and there are a lot of stories on how shipwrecked fishermen help one another. The Fujian governor gave gold and pieces of gifts to the Sultan of Sulu because they not only save the sailors, they help rebuild and repair the ships so that they can sail back to China. There are a lot of stories like that we should be proud of.
Which are not captured in our history books,
Hindi
are they?
masyadong nakukwento kasi very
Yes, yes.
Americanized and Americanized eh. Kaya yan,
Oo, oo.
100 years
How
ago.
do we rectify that? Because we're so rich in those vignettes, in those stories that need to be told.
Yeah, yeah,
What
a
would
famous
be?
a famous quotation from the
Uh-uh.
Chinese records talk about a very very graphic description, for example, about women climbing mountains like goats without holding on, with jars of water on their head. Di ba very graphic yung
Yes,
sayaw na
yes,
may
yes.
jars of
Oo,
water on,
oo.
and that is in the Chinese records. And then yung story about the Sulu, yung the pearl pond na it shimmers during moonlight night because of the many many pearls. Kahit sabi niya, you just dive and you can already find pearls in the Philippines. It's
Mm,
well
mm,
in
mm,
demand.
mm.
Yung Sultan of Sulu, yung may dramatic story dyan that is found in the history book about a 7-ounce pearl given
Wow.
as a gift to the emperor of
Where would that be now?
yet nobody, it has never appeared in the Chinese Gazette kasi lahat ng gifts dapat naka-record except that 7-ounce pearl. Sabi namin
Baka
sigurado yan,
folklore.
so the
But
empress wanted to
how
keep.
was it, how did anybody even know that such a pearl existed?
Yeah, it's in the stories, and there's a historical novel that
Mm,
talk about that, and then there are descriptions in some of the records, but
yes.
officially wala yon. But then in stories you find the 7-ounce pearl, which you can imagine because the Chinese records talk about the shimmering surface of the water because the luminescent pearls were shining under the water. Di ba? Mga
Mm, mm.
vignettes like that,
Yes, yes.
they're in Chinese, tapos classical Chinese pa. So, but slowly we are translating many of the very important ones.
There's a question here. I'll read it. Do you think knowing Chinese histories from its treasures, vignettes, technologies, and other Chinese social life are now accepted or embraced by the millennials in the Philippines?
May your students.
Maya? Yes, yes. Oo, si Maya, the teacher. Oo.
Um, it's actually what's I think somebody also asked something about Gen Z, no? It's a mix. The thing, okay, I'm gonna answer like a series of questions. I saw someone asking about the term Chinoy. Maybe we should just dispense with the term Chinoy, and then the Gen Z question, and then your question. Here's the thing: identity is formed. So this is an identity topic. Identity is formed because of your history, your culture, your traditions of past and present. That's what makes you who you are. And to dispense with the word Chinoy to refer to me is like spitting on my grandfather who braved the ocean, who puked his guts out in the ocean to come here because there was no food back there in China. You know, came here dirt poor, trying to make his way in the world and trying to survive. And this is exactly what our OFWs are doing now,
Yes, yes.
right? Trying to survive and doing everything they can in their power to ensure that their families do not die of starvation. So my ancestors were like that. My grandparents were like that. To give me the life that I have now. And to dispense with the ancestry and the culture and just to disregard it, it's like spitting on them, right? So no, the answer is no. We cannot remove the word Chinoy. This is part of who we are. In the same way that Tessie mentioned about being globalized, and we are now such a Gen Z are digital natives, so they are exposed to a myriad of cultures. Now,
Yeah.
if I also teach education subjects, I teach child development. Now, this is now a crucial part of identity development when a child when a child or a teenager especially is bombarded with all of these messages and they are not anchored on one identity, they get lost.
Mm-hmm.
They get lost, and this is psychology 101. This is child and adolescent development 101.
But you have to
No,
start that at an earlier
at an
age.
early age
Yes,
where
yes.
you need to anchor a child in
Yeah,
an identity. They need to find that. And
right.
this is what I'm seeing with Gen Z Chinoys. They've lost a lot of that because as parents, we're not very conscious about this. We think that oh, we practice these traditions. I have a friend, she's my age, we're 40 something, and she revealed to me this is the only year that she found out what peanut balls are for. We eat it on the 15th day of the lunar calendar of the first month as a celebration. And she only found out now because her mother never told her, even after she kept asking, what's this for? What's this for? And the mother would just go, no, just eat it. And she would
Mm-hmm.
just eat it, right? Because we were, as parents, our parents, some of them, my mother's generation, my generation, were not very conscious about transmitting our cultural traditions.
Yeah.
No, we're just going through the motions, not being very conscious of transmitting that. And this
Mm-hmm.
is not just a Chinoy problem. This is a
Yeah,
global phenomenon
that's
among
across all
second and third
cultures.
generation
Yes,
migrants.
yes, yes, that's true. Here's another question. In the context of overall influence in the country, the Chinoys have significant dimensions, especially in business and industry. She says, may we have Mrs. Angsi's views on this?
Yeah, it's just that there seems to be too much emphasis on the on the business side, no, on
Mm-hmm.
the merchant side, because we are a nation of traders. they are the ones who are very visible. No, you buy from them, you sell to them. What you see in front are the influences in business, because you encounter that daily. But what you don't see behind are some of the really luminaries in culture. You have Ang Kok, you have Jeffrey Ching in music, Jose Marichan in music, and all these things. But we put too much emphasis on the business successes. But the business successes is again a product of Philippine history. Because before 1975, you cannot own land, you cannot own business, you cannot be a doctor, you cannot be an engineer, you cannot be a teacher, because you need Filipino citizenship. Uh, nine, 90% of the alien Chinese became naturalized only in 1975 because
Yeah.
Marcos wanted to recognize the People's Republic of China. So he opened the citizenship to administrative process. So that's a time. Now you see the roster of top notcher in bar exam, medical exam, engineering exam. You see a lot of
Yes.
short surnames there. But before 1975, all of them went into business. That's why the predominant contribution of the Chinese in the Philippines, admittedly, is in business as a
It
context.
was a consequence of the times,
That's
and
a function
yeah,
and demand of the time. It's a niche that
yes,
they can fit in.
right,
Wala namang
yes,
ibang, dati nga pinamimigay, ano, you open up, let's say, Mindanao, we will give you, we will,
yes,
but
yes,
no,
uh,
no takers, because that is not their niche at that time. Was
mm,
service, no? Just like now, ang ano nila, when they go to North America, they end up in Silicon Valley, they end up in engineering and all these things, no?
yes.
Dito, they ended up in business. Except now, starting probably in the 90s, you see
The profile is
social
evolved, it's changing.
nature in social work. Is a
Yes,
Chinoy,
yes.
mga ganyan. So, things are also changing.
We have a lot of other questions, but I'm afraid we don't have any more time. Mrs. Angsi, May, I think we need a round two uh, to cover.
Ah,
We're just
sige.
scratching the surface, no? But before I call on President Francis to give his closing remarks, I'd like to request you to, to give your parting words. There would be messages that you want to bring across. Let's start with Maya and then see Mrs. Angsi.
No, for me lang, I just want to, if you can see my background, please message us on our social media accounts for questions that are unanswered. I'm the one who manages the social media account anyway. So, and we have a team of people answering questions. So
The
please
museum is
feel
still
free to message
closed.
us.
The museum
We're
is
physically
closed because of the
closed. Yes.
pandemic. When do you reopen?
No, because of the pandemic, so we're renovating.
Ah,
We've
I
knocked
see.
down
Okay.
everything.
So you're
So
going to reopen in a
2022
big way.
probably.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Message us on Facebook or Instagram. Ask your questions there, and we do have a team to answer your questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mrs. Angsi.
May I also post a lot of trivia? Can you relate or Chinese Filipino things in the Facebooks? So if the millennials, the Gen Z, if you need information, sometimes they're very good in making short posts like that that attracts attention, and then
Yeah.
you react or you ask questions when you read that. That is, and then siguro if nothing else, no, what we wanted to share with you is that we are part and parcel of national society and Philippine life. What happens to us affects national society. What happens to the Philippine society affects all of us. No? For example, I'm well known more in my anti-crime advocacy because if the Chinese Filipinos suffer, the business climate suffer, it's the Filipinos who suffer. Remember how many factories were closed down at the height of kidnapping because the Chinese were so frustrated and so scared that they left the country. We had a 400% capital flight during the
Yes.
90s when kidnapping happened. So we got involved because what affects us affect national society. During the EDSA revolution, the people power revolution, the Chinese Filipinos also fought for their birthright. We were there in EDSA fighting our birthright because we are part and parcel of national society. Our history is embedded in Philippine history in the same way that what happens in the Philippines in all events that shape the Philippines as a nation, it has affected the Chinese in the Philippines. So,
Very well said, Mrs. Angsi. We're one country, we're one people.
yes.
Can I now call on President Francis for his concluding remarks?
Hello.
Francis,
Thank you, Madu. Um, well, I'm one of the Tsinoys, although my color does not show it. Um, Undoubtedly, the Tsinoys played a very important role and continue to do so in Philippine society. And the presentations by both Tessie and I also work together in the JRI board, and her daughter, Maya, through their stories and snippets of information show that. For example, the rare collections shown by Maya from the Tsinoy Museum, the common technology underlying our rice terraces, the Chinese origin of the Philippine Carabao, and the Cannon Road, and even the names of some of our vegetables are just examples of the snippets of information showing our intertwined history and heritage with the Chinese people. But as Tessie and Maya have eloquently said, although we belong to different origins, we are one people, one nation. And it is our hope in Phoenix that it stays that way. Because we should have a whole of nation approach in all the problems that confront us. And our common heritage, common history, I think are something that we can dig into as we move forward, trying to solve the problem that's now besetting us and move toward full normalcy. Thank you, Tessie and Maya, for your time and for your presentations. And more importantly, for the very engaging exchange of ideas during the open forum. Of course, this would not have been made possible were it not for Balu, our permanent favorite moderator, for ably moderating the discussion. In Phoenix, we don't focus only on the financial well-being of our companies and our senior financial executives, but equally important, we develop our finance executives as a complete human being. Arts and culture, no doubt, are important aspects of the professional development of our finance executives. And therefore, my big congratulations go to the Arts and Committee of Phoenix, led by Chair Leah San Juan, and of course to Liaison Director Domingo for this successful webinar. As Balu has said, I think we're just scratching the surface, and I think and I propose that we have a second round of this session. So much to speak about our common heritage and history and learn from those things. Thank you to all our participants who attended this webinar, and we hope to see you not only in the programs of the Arts and Culture Committee, but to the other programs of Phoenix. Good afternoon to one and all.
thank you to everybody, and we hope to see you in our upcoming webinars and other events. Thank you, Mrs. Angsi. Thank you, Maya.
Tessie.
We hope we'll have
Maya.
another round with you.
Thank you, Malu.
Thank you.
You're very
Stay
good
safe to
moderator.
everybody.
Excellent moderator.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you. Thank you
Favorite
very
ko yan,
much.
favorite.
And Doming, of course, for inviting us.
It's our
Kababayan,
pleasure.
taga
It's
Cebu
our
pala
pleasure.
sila,
Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, just message us for your unanswered questions. I saw a lot in the
Maybe
Q&A box.
Maya, when the situation normalizes, you would have opened the museum. We'd like to arrange for an arts and culture tour of the museum. No? Maybe
Yeah,
next,
definitely. Yeah.
something to look forward to. Good
Yes.
luck to you, and good luck, Mrs. Angsi, for
Thank
your 1001 advocacies.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
to
you so
all.
much.
Thank you, thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Francis.
thank you.